Hello and welcome to Perspectives, where we take a deep dive into the issues of the day and where we take a look at people's opinion on such issues. I am Ruth Osime. Welcome back to Perspectives, the Honorized News. Kidnapping and hostage taking in Nigeria has now turned into a social problem which is affecting virtually every member of the Nigerian society in one way or the other. According to research, Nigeria records close to 4,000 kidnappings and 5 billion naira demands every year. Just recently, 137 young people were abducted during an attack in Kaduna. They were held captive for 16 days, but thankfully, all of them got back home safely, except for the teacher whose life was lost during captivity. This is a rare case, as most times, not all victims are rescued. 9 years after 276 schoolgirls were abducted in the middle of the night from the dormitory in Chibok, only 96 girls remain in captivity, and thousands more children have been subjected to grave violations of their rights. Nigerians are having to do crowdfunding merely to pay ransom to bandits and kidnappers, and all under the watchful eyes of the government and security agencies who do not do much, let's be quite honest, leaving Nigerians to their cruel fate. Nobody is spared of being a victim. No region in Nigeria is immune to the crime, as the act has transcended class boundaries. While some kidnappers go after the wealthy, others are becoming less prejudiced. Victims have stories to tell about what their families have gone through to rescue their kidnapped loved ones with no assurance of success. The rate at which innocent lives have been muddled through the menace of kidnapping and adoption in Nigeria is worrisome, because the impact of kidnapping is becoming excruciatingly difficult, and no one in Nigeria today, irrespective of age, status, or even political influence, can discern who will be the next victim. Everyone is sleeping with one eye open. We're heading for a short break, but stay with us, because next up, when we come back, will be our special guests. Seasoned journalist and communications expert Donu Kogbara and Mike Ejiofor, a former director of State Security Service. Perspectives return in just a moment. Welcome back to Perspective, your Honorized News. Donu Kogbara is a seasoned print and broadcast journalist and communications expert who has worked for well-known media outlets such as the Economist Intelligence Unit, Sunday Times newspaper, and BBC. She owns a consultancy firm called African Access that has done projects with several public and private sector clients. Donu has a weekly column in Vanguard, a Nigerian newspaper, and writes for the Africa Report, a Paris-based magazine. She also has a YouTube channel called Donu's World, which airs on Fridays, and a podcast called Africa Here and Now. And joining us is also Mike Ejiofor, who has had a long and distinguished career in Nigeria's security and intelligence sector. He joined the Nigerian Police Force as a cadet officer in 1981 and rose to the rank of superintendent in 1986. Mike Ejiofor transferred to the Department of State Services, where he served in various capacities until his retirement in 2010. He was a state director in 8 states, including Anambra, Akwa Ibom, Zamfara, Kogi, Edo, Oyo, Plateau, and Lagos. Mike was involved in several operations and investigations, such as the arrest of the notorious kidnapper Evans, the rescue of the abducted Chibok girls, and the foiling of several coup plots and terrorist attacks. On retirement, he became a security expert and analyst who often comments on national issues in the media and is known for his outspokenness and candor on security matters. Good morning to both of you, and welcome to Perspectives. Donu, how are you?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
I'm fine, thank you. Absolutely exhausted.
Oh, okay, okay. Don't worry, I won't drain you too much today. So I want to ask, you were kidnapped a few years back. Huh? Good to see you. You were kidnapped a few years back. Tell us how it happened and where you were taken to, and how long you were held captive for. How long did it take for your family to be contacted, and why so?
So it was August, a Sunday, the last Sunday in August in 2015. I was in my parents' house in Port Harcourt. And it was very early. My mother was getting ready for church when 2 armed gunmen grabbed her, jumped out of... They had overpowered the guards at the gate, the security guys, the guards, and they reached the house as my mother was leaving for church. I mean, I'm telling you this because I didn't know any of this at the time. And then they asked her where I was, where her daughter was, and she brought them to my bedroom. And that was the first I saw of them. At first I thought they were ordinary armed robbers, particularly since they asked for jewelry and money, if there was any jewelry or money in the room, which I quickly brought out. And then they told me to follow them. That was when I knew that it was a kidnap rather than just burglary or armed robbery.
Yeah, but during the experience itself, how were you transported or how did you get to where you were now based? How long did you stay there for? What was the process in the bargaining of your demand, of your ransom?
So they took me to a jeep that was parked outside, leaving my mother and the domestic staff behind, and they pushed my head down, and we drove to a little inlet, sort of like on the coast. How do I describe it? Maybe a cove or a bay, and there was a boat waiting there, a speedboat, and I entered the speedboat with one of them. By now, I was blindfolded, and I entered the boat with one of them, a guy called Engineer, and we seemed to travel forever on the water, and eventually stopped at one of these. It's difficult to describe if you've never seen it before, but in that part of the country, you have these fishermen huts that are in the middle of nowhere. They're on stilts, anchored in mangrove swamps, and surrounded by water. So by the time I was, they took the blindfold off, I saw where I was, and then I was required to walk to the hut, which was at the end of a long walkway. There were planks on stilts, and so that's how I got into this hut.
Okay.
I mean, I looked left, I looked right, I looked front, I looked back. There was water everywhere, no sign of any human settlement except for this hut.
Okay, like how long did it take for them to get in touch with your family, for them to know what was going on? And what did they ask for, and how much were they now giving at the end of the day?
Well, I was there alone with Engineer, as that was his nickname. And then some other people joined us a couple of days later. They didn't contact my family till I think it was about 5 days. It's very difficult to count. When you're in this situation, days and nights blur into each other. But I think it was on day 5 that they contacted my family. Now, before they contacted my family, I mean, I had access to what was going on in the outside world because there was a radio. And I could hear from the radio bulletins that my disappearance had caused quite a stir. And my mother had obviously reported the matter to the authorities. And so they kept on saying, Donu Kogbara, the journalist, has been abducted. Nobody knows where she is. And so, I would hear this. It was like a running news commentary, almost every news bulletin, almost every hour, for several days.
Okay, speaking of... okay.
And then eventually, they made...
Okay, so they didn't get in touch with your family until several days later. And I recall you actually said that they intentionally did that just to cause so much worry within your family. And by the time they called them, they are really in the panic state, which they achieved. Now, I wanted to ask, whilst you were in captivity,
yes,
were you ever manhandled? Did they ever try to rape you? And did anybody try to stop this? Did anybody sort of protect you whilst you were there amongst your captors?
Well, eventually I wound up with 9 young men most of them were in their 20s. I think the oldest was about 34 or 35. I know this not just by looking at them, but because I started to relate to them. We had conversations. And so I was there with 9. And out of the 9, I'd say only 2 were psychos. 2 of them, one of them beat me up a couple of times, you know? And the other one constantly threatened to rape me. But, you know, several of them were pretty respectful, actually. And, you know, they pushed the violent ones aside, you know, told them to leave me alone. So I did get some protection, yes, I did.
Okay. Now, how
they couldn't stop. Can I just finish?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
They couldn't stop their leader, who was called, and it's okay, no problem. They couldn't stop their leader, who was called Bossman, from beating me up, you know, a few times, but they did protest on my behalf.
Okay, another question is, you know, how well do families trust the police when it comes to kidnapping, and how well a role do they play with investigation, and what were you also advised about police concerning your matter? Do you think things could have improved?
Okay, well, I later discovered that people just, from experience, did not at that time trust the police if someone they knew was abducted. My family received advice from a number of organizations, and the general consensus was that the less the police were involved, the better.
Wow.
I think, of course, I didn't know this at the time. You know, I was in with the guys, and this was happening outside on the mainland. I was effectively on an island, okay? And I think, you know, the Nigerian police at that time, and probably still now, had a very poor reputation. Nobody trusted them. It was either there were issues around their integrity, whether you could even trust them not to be in cahoots with the kidnappers, and there were also issues around their competence, as in even if they meant well, because I mean there will always be good and bad people in any organization. So, you know, even the view was that even those who mean well and want to help abductees get rescued lack the capacity to make it happen without harm to the victim.
Okay, it's a sad picture that you've just depicted there. But you said something that I found really odd, and I need you to expatiate on this, because it's almost as if you are letting people see the other side of the coin. In other words, how the victim and the captors actually relate during the time of captivity. And you said that you actually developed a rapport with your captors. What did you discover about them?
Okay, well, first of all, let me say that not every kidnapping is the same, because every kidnapping is conducted by different individuals. Mm-hmm. I was lucky because out of the 9, 7 were what I would regard as basically decent human beings who had turned to crime out of desperation and who were not naturally violent or unpleasant. And then even the 2 who threatened me with rape and actually inflicted violence on me, they were not the worst kind of people. You could see that, you know, they had suffered their own traumas. And what I'm trying to say is that not everybody has kidnappers like this. Some people have there's people who've been really unlucky, where everybody in the gang that kidnaps them is a savage or sadist. So as I said, I was quite lucky in the sense that my kidnappers were on the whole quite pleasant and very interested in talking to me and getting to know me. And I, of course, being a journalist and a naturally curious person, was also very interested in getting to know them. So we had many long conversations. They told me about their lives, I told them about mine. They asked me loads of questions about my family, my son. They even asked for photographs. They wanted to see what my son looked like. And they asked me, they knew quite a bit about me because somebody close to me had given them information that enabled them to know when I was in Port Harcourt and where they could grab me. So whoever it was had given them a lot of information about me. So for example, they knew that I had grown up in the UK. And they asked me so many questions about England. They were very interested. And you know, sometimes they would display a kind of touching type of ignorance. Like they would say things like, is Manchester United the capital of London? Or is London the capital of Manchester United? And it was, you know, I felt so much for them. They all had very, very underprivileged upbringings.
That is fascinating.
They were all what I would describe as victims of a predatory Nigerian elite. The Nigerian establishment, very, very selfish. We're the ones who have created this cadre of human being, if you ask me.
Thank you so much, Donu. Let's go for a break now, and then when we come back, I will introduce Mike Ejiofor into our conversation. So hope to see you soon. We're going for a break right now. Be right back in 5 minutes. Welcome back to Perspectives. Now, we have Donu again, and hopefully joining us will be Mike Ejiofor. But until Mike comes on, Donu, let's continue from where we stopped off. Now, I want to ask, before we get to the end of your situation, what happens? Were your kidnappers arrested? Were they caught? And what happens to them?
After I was released, you know, I went back to the UK. I first stopped in Abuja to see the Inspector General of Police and the British High Commissioner, and then I went back to London. And so a lot of what happened, I'm not really aware of the details. What I was told is that they had arrested most or all of them. Of course, nobody was sure. Now, they sent me photographs in London by email to identify the people that they had caught. I only recognized, I think, two people. One was Bossman, the leader of the gang, and the other one, there were a couple of others, I didn't recognize them. So I said, no, these guys were not with me in the hut. So they said, but they're part of the same gang. They were the people on the mainland who were providing you guys with provisions, water, because almost every day a speedboat would come with water, food, you know, all the stuff we needed. So I never really knew whether they got the right people or not, apart from the one or two that I recognized.
So how were you dropped off?
Yeah, so
how were you dropped
I
off?
never saw a lineup. I never saw a lineup of 9 people.
Yeah. How were you dropped off?
Well, when the ransom was paid, eventually after 13 days, I was taken in a boat to a riverine community in Rivers State in Port Harcourt called Borokiri, and it was a sort of back end of Borokiri, very, very, very sort of poor, terrifying place full of people. Just I've never seen such poverty. Anyway, that's where I was dropped off. These huts on stilts with sort of like almost like, it was just terrible. Anyway, it was late at night, and I somehow managed to stumble through this shanty town until I got to the main road. With help, somebody helped me. I can't even remember who the person was, and I got a taxi home.
Okay.
They dropped me and they disappeared. So they dropped me at this.
What do you think are the socio-economic drivers of this menacing trend, and what alternative solutions should be explored to end the trust of citizens, especially when it comes to the police?
So you asked me what I think the drivers are.
Yes, of this menacing trend, and what do you think? What kind of alternative solutions can be put on ground to just curb this menacing trend?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would say is that the Nigerian elite, the Nigerian establishment, very selfish, very predatory, very uncaring. So I put the high crime rate in this country squarely on the shoulders of the Nigerian elite. Of course, being born poor does not give you an excuse to become a kidnapper or a murderer or any kind of criminal. It's not, after all, many people who are born poor are not criminals or kidnappers. But it makes the anger and desperation that turns people into criminals understandable.
Okay.
I think if a reasonable fraction or percentage of the money that has been earned from oil since 1960 had been spent on securing the lives and futures of the masses, a lot of the things we're going through today and have been through in recent years will not take place.
You're very correct.
I think it was Awolowo, or one of the senior politicians, I think it was Awolowo, who is now late, of course, said something like, if you don't allow the poor to progress, their children will not let you sleep.
That's a good one. Anyway, Donu, don't go anywhere soon.
And I think that's what's happening.
We have Mike Ejiofor on air, so Donu, stay with us. So can we have Mike, please? Oh, Mike, here you are. Long awaited. Good to see you on our own perspectives. I want to ask you, some say Terrorism Prevention Act that makes payment of ransoms punishable will not deter people whose loved ones are held hostage by deadly gunmen. People think it's a tough rhetoric rather than an actual solution to the problem. Now, what even makes it more interesting is that you, a security personnel, have been a victim of kidnappers. And if the likes of you, somebody so high up, can be kidnapped, what hope do we have, us the mere citizens? So how do you think this issue can encourage families on how best to protect themselves? How do you think it's going to stop them from paying the kidnappers when ransoms are asked for? What's your take on this? Do you think it's a good idea to not pay and follow the act that has been provided for us, or pay as and when needed?
I didn't hear that question clearly.
Okay, do you want me to repeat it? So, okay.
Yes.
I said, some say the Terrorism Prevention Act that makes payment of ransoms punishable will not deter people whose loved ones are held hostage by deadly gunmen. People think it's just a tough rhetoric and not an actual solution to our problem. So I want to ask you, because you as a security personnel, and a high one at that, have been kidnapped before and you paid a ransom. So what hope is there for us, the common men or common man? Did you hear my question?
Well, despite the pension, the Terrorism Act punishing kidnapping, it will not stop people from kidnapping for obvious reasons. One, you have kidnapping has industry with which people collect money and do all sorts of things. You see, you hardly can get a housebreaking robbery because people don't keep money in their houses. The Terrorism Act. You see people going out for kidnapping to enrich themselves because it's the quickest way to make money. Like I said, it has become an industry, and is a very, no matter the penalty, people will still go ahead and kidnap. So the best thing is to see and we stop this kidnapping. We've tried a lot of issues that have. So I believe what we should do, only victims' relations are very impatient to work with security agencies. Otherwise, if you work with security agencies to get the money marked, it will help to deter these people. You remember that the former governor of Central Bank, Emefiele's wife, was kidnapped, and in the process, the money was marked, and they followed the money through, and the people were arrested. But now it's not the case because everybody who is kidnapped wants safety of their relations or the victims. So that's why it's a problem. No matter the amount of punishment, people will still be encouraged. Apart from that, we also have these ideological kidnappers, these people who go to school for mass kidnapping, and the rest of them to make money and drive home their point that is forbidden.
Okay. In recent times, there has been an elaborate public call for deregulation of police and policing in Nigeria. Do you see any provision or any solution if this is if this can be implemented? Did you hear me?
Come again.
I said in recent times there's been an elaborate public call for deregulation of police and policing in Nigeria. Do you see this as any? Do you see the solution of this if it's if it can be implemented? Do you see any provision or any solution if this is if this can be implemented?
Well, if it's implemented, might not necessarily be entire solution. We need to make our enforcement agents more effective in tackling this menace. By that, what I mean is the action agencies don't have the capacity to deal with this issue of kidnapping because the way they operate, the forest is very vast. You can't follow them. Most of them use motorcycles, a great number of motorcycles, and they move in hundreds. We don't have the sufficient manpower to go out and pursue these people when they come to attack communities.
Okay. But can you tell us your own experience when you were kidnapped? Can you tell us, summarize your own experience for us? Because I know that you were kidnapped. What happened? Where were you taken to? How were you released? How much was paid? The whole 9 yards. If you can just relive that experience with us.
Well, I've discussed this issue for so many times, and it's now been overflowed. At times I'm misquoted, at times most media houses quote me out of context. What I said and continue to maintain that initially everywhere is that you don't pay ransom. And that has been my position, that people should not pay ransom. But you discover that unless you are involved or you are affected, you hardly can do anything than to pay ransom. So I said that I'm a victim. And when I came out, and people asked me, I said the option is yours. If you like, you pay ransom if you like. But if you don't pay ransom, but the fact remains that anybody whose relation is kidnapped or a victim there will want a safe return of that. So the option is yours.
Okay. Now let's go back to Donu, because this is a very heart-wrenching and very scary situation to be in, and sometimes it can have the most terrible psychological effect. Nobody thinks about the after effect of kidnapped victims when they are released. So I want to ask you, Donu, that after you were released, how did this affect you as a person? Or how has your experience affected you as a person, mentally and emotionally?
Well, as a person, as a victim,
No, the question was for Donu.
See?
The question was for Donu. Donu, go ahead. Donu, go ahead. We can hear you.
It has had a devastating impact on me psychologically and physically. I think I can safely say that I suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. I would have the most terrible hallucinations. Imagine things like snakes coming at me like torpedoes, wrapping themselves around my body. I would imagine bullets flying at me and covering me, and just all kinds of terrible images. And eventually I had to be heavily sedated. Though the funny thing is that the drugs I was given were pretty, they would make me sleep for hours. But people around me didn't know I was drugged. I was still working and I was still functioning as a mother. My son was still a student at that time. But it was very, very difficult. And those drugs made me put on so much weight. and created a weight problem I'm still struggling with today. And I think the experience just made me a more fragile person. I'm much more fragile now than I used to be. My sister says I'm more subdued. I mean, that was like, what, 9 years ago? And I'm still a nervous wreck. I can't live in I've never been able to live in my family home in Port Harcourt again since then, because that's where they dragged me out of. I can only stay in places that are heavily guarded, like hotels. At least, not just heavily guarded, but where anybody who's looking for you would find it difficult to find you in a hotel. And even if they did find you, there's so many people around, they would get caught. Here in Abuja, I live in a mega high security district close to the presidential villa. So it's just turned me into a nervous wreck. It's made me a sadder person. It's made me a fatter person. And it really impacted on my mother terribly as well. My mother got trauma-induced dementia. She passed away last year. But her last few years were utterly miserable. And the psychiatrist who attended to me and my mother after this experience told me that it was his opinion that the dementia had been triggered by shock.
Okay. But many more other Nigerians journalists have been through the same experience as you, and they too have their own stories to tell. What advice would you give any journalist, especially in your situation, that should they ever experience such situations, what would you advise them? How would you advise them to behave or better handle it? Because you've worn those shoes. What would you advise to make their captivity less more tolerable?
The first thing I'd say is that not everybody reacts the same way to trauma or to, terrible experiences. I salute the many Nigerians, including journalists, who have been through a similar experience and come out at the other end fairly whole. Not everybody is a nervous wreck like me, right? Then the second thing I would say is that, some of them went back to live in the same houses where they were dragged out of. A lot of people have, coped very well.
Okay, what do you think about this? Okay, go on, sorry. I didn't know you were still... Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that...
I was just going to ask, can you share your thoughts on safety and security?
I'd also like to say that not everybody was as lucky as I was. There are people, I heard about one guy who was snatched from an oil company with 2 other colleagues. They murdered 2 of the colleagues and left him alive to sleep between the 2 corpses for several days in an open forest situation.
Wow.
They weren't even in a hut like me. And as the corpses decomposed, the smell assailed his nostrils. Till today, that man has what we call olfactory hallucinations. That means he cannot get the smell of those decomposing corpses out of his nose. He smells that smell everywhere he goes, till today. And this is about 10 years ago.
These are exactly what we're talking about. Can you share your thoughts on the safety of Nigeria, safety and security of media people in Nigeria? What do you think?
I don't think, for as long as law enforcement is so weak and corrupt, not all police and army and what have you are corrupt or weak. Some of them are heroic individuals who would love to do a better job, but the system doesn't really encourage effective law enforcement. So for as long as the authorities cannot take care of Nigerian citizens properly, I have no advice to give anybody about safety, because you can be grabbed at any time from almost anywhere, unless you live in a special privileged enclave. I guess you could just be a bit careful, make sure you're not being followed. Don't go out very late at night on your own. But at the end of the day, you can't live in a bubble. You can't wrap yourself in cotton wool and never go to a party or never go anywhere. Like my auntie has just died. I'm really worried about going to her burial in Abia, because of the drive from the airport to the village. What can you do in such situations if the government can't take care of you and can't protect you?
Okay, I think we have Mike. Do we have Mike back on air? I have a question for Mike. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back to you soon. Mike, I'm here. I'm back with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, as individuals, we all now live in fear of becoming victims, with little or no confidence in the police coming to our aid. What's your advice to the average Nigerian concerning this prevailing issue? What preventative measures can you advise people to take at this point in time?
Well, for now, I think everybody should be involved. Should be awareness. People should be security conscious of their environment. We should not leave everything to government. Everybody is saying government security forces must provide everything. We as citizens need to provide information. By being conscious of our environment, if there's any change, you call the security agencies and report to them. It's not just sitting down and expecting this security. We don't have sufficient manpower to take care of all these security challenges. We don't have the technological manpower. We don't have the ordinary manpower. We don't have sufficient funds. So everybody must be involved. And that's why I've been advocating, ever since. And I'm happy that the government is taking that initiative. Security challenges are local. And the solutions must be local. People who don't know their environment as security agencies, you allow them to be operating in a strange area, in area where their culture is different, their religion is different, there's no confidence between the people and the security agency. So there's need for this localization by establishing the local police so that people around know their environment and will assist the security agencies. I think for now, that's the way to go.
Okay. The Chief of Defense Staff, General Musa, has adopted a non-kinetic approach in the war against insurgency following the realization that the desire to win the war using kinetic options has been unrealistic. So what does this non-kinetic approach involve?
It's for me?
Yes, that was for you. Sorry, Mr. Mike. I said the Chief of Defense Staff, General Musa,
Yeah.
The Chief of Defense Staff, General Musa, has adopted the non-kinetic approach in the war against insurgency following the realization that the desire to win the war using kinetic option has been unrealistic. So what does this non-kinetic approach involve?
Yeah. You see, it's only a madman that will be doing the same thing and expect a different result. We have used more of kinetic approaches which did not work. And I think the non-kinetic, most of the non-kinetic approach we should have is education of the people by making them conscious. People, if they are educated, like these people being recruited into the terrorists and bandit groups, if they are educated, they should ask themselves the question, how come the children of the elites, they're outside schooling, and yet you begin to use other people's children for? Apart from that, government should create employment, provide basic amenities. I think when all these things are put in place, power, for instance, if we have constant power, there should be the skilled and non-skilled artisans will be engaged, and they will be out of this dangerous trade. So we should concentrate more on good governance in part of non-kinetic. There's nothing you can do. Go and give palliative to everybody. It will not work when we don't have good governance.
Okay. Another question I would like to throw at you is that no fewer than 50 repentant thugs in Kano were converted to police special constabulary by the Kano State Police and command after undergoing training. Now, why are some of these criminals being integrated into society rather than being punished for their acts? What message does this send across?
Well, the army has denied it, but for me, when the war is still on, have changed their mind. It's not going to help her because most of them are hardened criminals. There's nothing you will do to make them change their mind. For now, reintegrating them in the society is not the best option. government should reconsider that thing. Get the people prosecuted. Ever since they have been in custody, what has government done in terms of de-radicalization? You begin to tell me the people have been de-radicalized, only for them to go back, immediately release them back into the society. I don't think it's a wise decision until this war is won. There's no amnesty for anybody.
I totally agree with you. Then another thing, we recently saw where the 170 children kidnapped in Kano or Kaduna were released, and there was a big photo op celebrating the release and everything. But we were not told anything about how they were released, what happened in the process, what they did to the kidnappers, whether they raided the sites, whether they have arrested them. Nothing. We just saw released children. So in this case, and we also realize that not all children have been released, and I'm not just talking about Kaduna. Other children that have been kidnapped, like the Chizop girls, we still have about 97 children left. So in celebration of victory, not premature, considering not everyone has been released. What about those whose children are still held captive? And what about informing us, giving us the same photo of showing where you've gone to the site, arrested the kidnappers, and thrown them in jail? Why are they not giving? Why don't we see as much of those as we see of the children being released?
I think that's an excellent. Information from the authorities about crime.
So, go on. Go on. Did you hear my question?
Yeah.
Mr. Mike, did you hear my question?
Oh, was it meant for me? Repeat the question, please.
Okay, I was talking about the photo op of the children that were released recently in Kaduna, 197 children who were released. And that's why don't we also see photo ops of kidnappers being arrested, being sentenced? Why don't we see pictures of them where they have gone to the sites of where they reside, and those sites are demolished? Why don't we see things like that? And then in terms of celebrating victory of rescue, is it not celebrating victory of rescue? Is it not a bit premature, considering there are people whose children are still held captive? So these are two questions in one. In other words, why don't we get as much information of what happens behind the scenes, and also why are we celebrating when there's people whose children are still being held captive?
Well, I'm relying on the information given by government. I don't know what happened behind the scene. So I think government is in a better position to answer that question. First of all, government said they are not paying ransom. The people have been released. No arrest was made, and I wouldn't be in a position to answer any of those questions. I don't know what happened. Possibly there was negotiation. Possibly there was an encounter before the people are released. I don't know the details.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Mike Ejiofor, for although slightly eclectic interview, but thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much, Donu, for also being with us and sharing your experience. And we hope that this will just at least enable viewers to understand the trauma of being kidnapped and also ways in which you can at least protect yourself under the circumstances. And we do hope that the government too would also pull their weight in keeping their citizens safe. Thank you for being with us on Perspective. We hope to see you again soon. So kidnapping in Nigeria has become an urgency, and as you know, at the end of the day, our health, our state of mind is what is most paramount. We hope that the Nigerian government will take it upon themselves to make life easier for the citizens and make life more bearable for us so that we can sleep with both eyes closed and not just one eye open. I hope to see you again next week. You'll be watching Perspective here with me on Arise News. Thank you so much. My name is Ruth Osime. See you next week. And remember, life is a learning curve. Thank you.